Fabulous. We are live. And we have people rolling in.
Oh.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm going to drop something in the chat. I think this works here. Welcome, everyone. We're going to wait a little for a few more people to join before we kick things off. In the meantime, Kate and Madhav, why don't you drop your names into the chat for us?
Hello. My name is Caitlin, but y'all can call me Kate.
My turn, right? Okay. Yeah. I'm Madhav. I basically lead marketing at Storylane.
Basically, you lead marketing at Storylane.
Yeah.
I'm sort of the marketing leader.
I've been rethinking because a lot of the work we do is content. So it's kind of like I've been internally calling myself like the chief content officer, but like nobody kind of gets that. They're just like, well, I mean,
You're the marketing guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the marketing guy. Yeah.
I lead customer and product marketing over at Challenger. Y'all are familiar with the Challenger sale. We're the company now that's inspired by the book, came from the book. So a lot of really cool sales training, enablement, all that cool stuff over at the Challenger universe. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I was an early Storylane customer, and I'm now helping Storylane on their webinar strategy, which I'm very happy to be here. I think we can kick things off. So a quick intro to our topic today. We are talking about competitive positioning. And this is something that's like always a challenge, but especially so when you have feature parity with your fiercest competitors. So, that's why Kate's joining us today. She has some experience with this. And now that we've introduced ourselves, basically we're going to cover how to tell when your competitive positioning is effective, what strategies Kate has had for launching features that competitors already offer. We're going to talk about the best formats for sharing competitive positioning content internally and externally once you've decided on the position. And probably there'll be some other rants and musings as we go. So to start, Kate, can you share kind of like, what does positioning mean to you? What does messaging mean to you? Like, let's just orient everyone around like your general kind of definition of these basic concepts.
Yeah, so if you're going to learn, I love alliterations. I love keeping things short and condensed. So to me, positioning is perception in the market. So how do you want to be seen? Who are you talking to? What spaces do you live in? And the messaging is amplifying that perception in the market. So, the kind of words that you use, the ways in which you present information, I think it's so much deeper than just like, really fun, punchy lines. It's how do you talk about your solution? How do you talk about your problems, more importantly, out in the market? So those are kind of my two definitions. So perception, positioning, amplifying messaging.
Mm-hmm. What about differentiation? This is a hard one for me because I'm kind of like positioning, differentiation is not the same thing.
It's definitely not. I think differentiation is like that one. You think about like kind of the T-shaped marketer example. That one level deeper, right? So when you're talking about your perception, so you're like kind of on a shelf. So I don't know if y'all have ever been to the grocery store.
And I have been.
Foreign concept, grocery store. But if you've noticed, you're in the cereal aisle. I don't know, the Kellogg CEO is top of mind for what's going on with him. But you have the cereal aisle, right? And typically, what's at eye level and belower, it's like children's level. That's where they place things, right? So that you have an aisle full of cereal, right? So that's perception. That's positioning. You're the cereal aisle. But where you're placed on that shelf, that level deeper is your differentiation. So if I'm selling to kids, right, I'm going to put the Lucky Charms where they can grab them so they can go, Mom, Dad, give me the sugar. But if I'm a health brand, I'm normally higher because I'm where the adults are. So to me, it's that level deeper. Yeah.
Interesting. I like that. That's a really good metaphor. I'm going to think about that a little bit more. So then, like, when positioning is good, competitive positioning, general positioning, like, how do you know? What do you look for?
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful question. I think it's so much easier to say when it's bad, right? And you're seeing the same jargony, product marketers are so guilty of this, same words like, seamless. Zach Roberts made a great post about that the other day. Like, everything is seamless. What does that mean? Helps you grow revenue. What does that mean? When you start to sound like everybody else, that's how you know it's bad. How you know it's good is it may not resonate with you specifically, but it resonates with your buyers and your customers. And you're getting those head nods and customer cards like, yeah, that really, you're speaking my language. You're starting to speak what they're saying. So I think that's when competitive positioning is really good, is when you are you're on that shelf, but you're speaking to your buyer more importantly than anything.
Mm-hmm. And we talked before about how, like, there's also kind of like numerical indicators of, you are getting the right customers. Maybe your ACV increases. Maybe churn is impacted in a positive way. Like, can you speak a little bit more to those indicators as well?
Yeah, so I think competitive differentiation in terms of like those numerical values is, you're right. You're seeing more of the customers that you want. So if you're focused on the enterprise space, you see more of them coming in the pipeline. That's validating, right? Because it means that the message that's out in the market is they're resonating with that, and they're like, oh, I want to talk to that provider, right? Same deal with churn. So you're seeing more of the customers. You may see a dip in customers that you don't want to service, or that aren't right for your solution, right? So maybe it's that SMB or mid-market that you're deprioritizing as a business for a strategy, but you're seeing, those key enterprise customers retain at a higher clip. So those are two things that you can look at. Another thing is on the product adoption side. So if you're in SaaS, if you're seeing those numbers go up, if you're seeing, more usage, higher clicks, things like that, those are more of those, like, kind of, my opinion, more lagging indicators. But it all helps tell that numerical story that where you are in the market is where you need to be.
Yeah. That's going to take a while for sure. Like, if the sales cycle is longer than like a day, like, and if you have an annual renewal cycle, it's going to take a while. Were you going to say something?
No. I was just saying 100% agree, because I think it's kind of like even within, like, the interactive demo space that we're in, right? Like, there's people that kind of come in with all sorts of perceptions, right? And I really liked, the grocery store example, Caitlin. Like, that was amazing. Like, that's an interesting way to kind of obviously think about positioning and differentiation, right? I think another interesting take that I also saw, I mean, I think I heard, and I really resonated with that, was, I think when you think about your positioning, you're kind of expressing your point of view, right? And there's perhaps some folks that kind of understand your point of view, some don't, right? And for other products, there's kind of like a different point of view, and I think that point of view is what you're basically trying to sell on a high level, right? Like, and that's what people kind of just buy into, that point of view, and that's what translates into the product, into your messaging, into your content and everything, right? Just I thought I'd just kind of add there, but yeah.
We also talked about how the competitors that are showing up in deals can also tell you if you're on the right track or not. Right. Can you give an example of that, Caitlin, from your career?
Right. So I used to work in the LMS market, which is learning management systems, there's an LMS for, we weren't just competing against other providers, we were competing against homegrown solutions. Like, it's dense, right? So when we were focusing on moving more up market, we were seeing more of those up market providers pop up in deals, which was an indicator to us that, like, okay, we're on the right playing field. Now we got to beat them out in the sales conversation and in our services, of course. But we were seeing less of those, SMB or mid-market kind of providers, because they're like, okay, we're definitely, like, our demand gen did a great job of targeting the right folks. Our product marketing messaging was really strong and getting those people in the pipeline. So that's definitely an example that I've seen where it's definitely been really cool to see, okay, we're seeing different competitors. So now we got to enable the teams, right? Sales and CS, to talk about these competitors differently because they're different players, but we're in the space. So that's a huge indicator that you're shifting in the right direction.
In a previous company of mine, it was, like, very clear. The main thing that I've seen is, like, oh, they're looking for more of an SMB solution than what we provide, or, like, price is the most important thing to them, not, like, our sort of upside. So it was like that I've definitely seen before. Madhav, one thing I'm curious about is like, I know the interactive demo space is very fierce also. Like, does this resonate with you at all?
I mean, it does. Yeah. I mean, I guess it does. Like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into the nitty gritty. So, Caitlin, when we were chatting previously, you gave some examples of like times that you were launching features when you were at this LMS company, where the competitive set basically already had the feature, and it was kind of like, okay, great. Like, basically, we're just like we're just like getting to the bar. Like, we're not necessarily like, it's not a game changer. It's not huge upside, advantage. Now it's like, okay, great, we finally can do what everyone else can do. Talk me through, like, you as a product marketer, you're in this position, you're like planning the product launch, and you're like, what do I say?
Oh my gosh. So this was definitely one of my favorite battle scars of my product marketing career. So worked really closely with the product manager and the VP of product at the company at the time. And they were like, actually, Kate, and they did some great preliminary like product research. I think also what's really key here is if you're not super tight with your product leads, you got to get really tight with them in the dev process, right? Because they're the ones that are going to build the feature and bring it to life. And those problems they're solving, the user stories behind it are going to be so key to your messaging. So I want to give a little plug to the product managers. But so I have a couple of notes because I was kind of reflecting on it over the weekend. And so what I did was, so we had a standalone feature that we sold that was actually it was gamification. For y'all aren't familiar with it, basically gamification is like the badges and like the leaderboard, stuff that makes learning fun. I say fun with quotation marks because, is it really fun? But it makes it a little more enjoyable as you're going through courses and getting certifications, all that stuff. So it was built to replace something that we actually charged clients for before. And so that was a huge piece of our messaging, right? So we're like, we're actually going to build this. This is in-house now. And it was also, I think you have to look at timing of where the economy was. It was early 2023 when things were looking really shaky. So we also took beyond feature parity. We really didn't even talk about the features that, of course, we educated the team on them and they were able to speak to it. But the benefits and the messaging that we shared was we're an enterprise level solution. So where are we on the shelf? We're that enterprise, we're up at the top. We know that this is table stakes. We even kind of admitted that. We're like, this is table stakes. We're going to put this in the future and it's free. And we're not going to charge you. We're not going to change your pricing because we know how important your education initiative is to you. So that's where and so like I said, we leaned into the economy was kind of shaky. People were making tough decisions. It really helped our retention rates in a lot of ways. And then lastly, we also leaned into how our product solved for multiple audiences. That was a huge overall product narrative that we had. We solved for internal, for customers, and for partners. So we talked about how gamification can help you see more revenue from your partner teams, right? If you're doing partner selling, we saw how it helps with retention with your customers if you're doing customer education and how gamification lies into that. So that was kind of our three-pronged approach into launch. And we really didn't talk about the features at all. We talked about jobs to be done. We talked about problems that they're experiencing. And that's how we really brought up the benefits of gamification throughout, even though it was table stakes in our market.
So
Sorry, Chantal. I mean, I've got a question, Caitlin. So, who led this conversation? So, you mentioned that, you decided that, you're going to go for enterprise clients and you're going to go for, all of these different ways to kind of look at it, right? Who led this conversation and that alignment in the organization that this is what our positioning is?
Yeah, so it came from the strategic direction was definitely from our CEO at the time. So he was like, this is where we want to be. Now let's go get there. And so I worked hand in hand with our product managers and our VP of product to talk about how we were going to get there, how we were going to tell the story. I did a lot of deep research on, what enterprise level clients cared about in terms of like education and customer education and all that good stuff. But when I started to write out like the narrative work and the launch brief, so to speak, I was really leading that effort. And it took a lot of convincing. There's even an element of like internal marketing. You have to prove this is the right direction to go in. And that I think sometimes is harder than marketing externally when you have to like convince the people that are going to be telling the story that it's worth it and that it's right, it's validated. So it was definitely led by product marketing, but having a strong support from our product team was everything to getting it over the finish line.
The internal marketing, the internal marketing is actually very difficult. I 100% agree, to kind of get everybody aligned. So, like, were you perhaps kind of, was there some sort of an internal session that happened with folks? Was there like a, I don't know, a central agreed document that kind of everybody kind of like, what did that internal marketing perhaps look like to get everybody on the same page?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of like kind of the peppering and the breadcrumbing. So I was leading at the time an internal newsletter for product updates. So I would sit with the product team every other week. I'd gather what was on their timeline, and I would ship it out to the rest of the company. And so I started talking about gamification, started talking about our previous standalone offering and how that was sunsetting. So I think that was a signal to the internal teams like, hey, we're getting rid of something that we would sell. Like, what's next? I started talking about, the overall product story for the year was a purpose-built platform, right? So it was everything in-house. So they were like, okay, we're getting rid of a feature, but everything's going to be in-house. What does that mean? And I started talking about gamification, the benefits of it in that newsletter to kind of just to set some context and foundation. I think context is so important. So it started with an internal newsletter, and then we started doing product readouts. And we had an enablement session. I was leading enablement at the time as well, where I introduced the product narrative to the company. And we showed the timeline for launches for the year. This is all in early to mid-January. We said, we're going to launch gamification. This is why, this is how we're going to do it. And we started enablement sessions that February. So it was a lot of like just end of December, like a lot of like end of Q4, early Q1, like peppering and preparation for our first major launch of the year. And I think when people they know timelines, they know when to pay attention, they're a lot more receptive to the story you're telling that you want them to tell their clients and their prospects in the market. So that's kind of how we did it. Any questions about that process at all?
I have one question. I want to like make sure I ask it before we move on from the topic, which is like the actual kind of like position, like the differences in your positioning from your competitors. So you mentioned you really focused on jobs to be done. You really focused on like the whole platform message. You really focused on like the multiple audience potential for your customers and prospects. And you talked about business impact. What I'm curious is like, which of those things are different than what your competitors were talking about?
That is such a great question. It was definitely the multiple audience play. What was happening was a lot of our clients, I think also something that you really need to play into is why your customers either replaced you with a solution before. Like, why are they coming to you? Like, what do you have that their previous solution couldn't do? Whether it was, like I said, in the LMS space, it was homegrown, like they maybe outgrew the solution or they're trying to expand. So we played into that audience differentiation a lot. So we can educate. We have one platform that can educate 3 of your audiences. If you're looking to grow with education, like this is how you're going to do it with our platform. And it was genuinely true. No other competitor could do that, even though we were adding a table stakes feature because it was like, okay, customers are asking us, why don't y'all have this? This is not making any sense to us. So it was definitely that multiple audience play and how gamification played into that.
And in this case, like if you were talking to a prospect who didn't have multiple audiences to serve, they'd be kind of like, oh, like it's less of a strong message. But I think the point I'm trying to get at is like this positioning is a home run for certain prospects, and for others, they're kind of like, that doesn't resonate with me. But that's part of this, is that you're honing in on the real people that you want to be serving, and everyone else, you're kind of like, I'm okay with this, like maybe not working anymore.
Exactly. And I think also that goes into, you're looking at who are you retaining from your customer base and who's going away. And we knew based on like tons of customer analysis that like if a customer didn't have at least 2 audiences, we were not the platform for them. And we had to be okay, and our sales team had to be okay with sharing that out to them because it wasn't benefiting our business and it wasn't benefiting them, most importantly. So I love that point.
Another thing we talked a little bit about is like, is there a point of view that your company can share in the market that your competitors are not sharing? In your case, were you creating a lot of content about the multiple audiences, like, and how your LMS solution like should help you serve multiple audiences? Like, I'm curious how this manifested itself in all of your marketing stuff, like at the top of the funnel.
Yeah, so we talked about a lot in our webinar. So we bring on customers that were doing this like multiple audience, differentiated like customer education, partner education initiatives. We brought them into like our monthly webinars. We did blog posts about them, talked about them on social, did a lot of like quick customer stories that were really fun to put together. So we were definitely sharing that. And at the time, customer education was kind of I will say HubSpot definitely, they were like the gold standard. They were the ones that were creating the first kind of like academies and courses that weren't for internal teams, but we took that and really just like ran with it, right? And said, okay, this is the next level to, what customer education was, what partner education was. So we were definitely putting a lot of information out into the market. We were also in a lot of communities too, just sharing information, right, with practitioners in the space. Like, hey, did you think about, how to start this motion at your company, or, how are y'all going to grow, and how are you going to, that near bound kind of motion instead of like the outbound obsession. It's like, what about that near bound market, right? Like a lot of your new business is going to come from folks closest to you. How are you going to educate them and get them to stay? So we were definitely having, through like SDR conversations, our like kind of hunter sellers, they were talking about that in the market. So we were definitely starting a conversation and obviously leading back to our solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned when we were talking previously about how Challenger has this concept of the reframe, where another option is to kind of like dial up the pain that customers are experiencing with competitive options.
Right.
Can you just share a little more about that?
Yeah. So the reframe is a really cool piece of the Challenger methodology. And we have a kind of like a little slogan that's like, it's not what you sell, it's how you sell it. It's the conversations that you're having with your customers. And so part of my job as product marketing on the marketing side of the house is to make sure that we provide the right context, materials, collateral that helps our sellers have these conversations in the market. And so the reframe is teaching your client basically something new that they weren't thinking about, that's bigger than the problem that they came to you for. Because if you don't solve this problem first, this other problem is minuscule compared to what you're really facing. And so it takes a lot of constructive tension. So being able to like bring that to a potential customer. Obviously, you can't just say whatever flies off the wall. You have to have research behind it. But it's great because you can point back to your solution in a way that just makes you the only vendor that can solve the problem.
It looks like you're about to say something.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Because so kind of going back to your earlier example, right? Like where you were basically taking some of the positioning, right? And then kind of like the multi-audience play, right? And then you were externally communicating through your content, through all of those other things, right? That's very similar to what we also do at Storylane, right? Like, so for example, interactive demo space is very competitive, and there's players with all sorts of players, different ones. Ours is more like we also have a multi audience kind of a play, right? So it's kind of like we're focusing on both sales and marketing teams. So when we kind of create content, it's for sales and it's for marketing, right? It's when you look at our video initiatives, it's for sales, it's for marketing, and that's kind of how we communicate it. So that makes sense. And then when it comes to perhaps, so coming to this, the other point you mentioned about dialing up the pain, right? Which is, it's interesting because, so we also see that, we see our competitors kind of saying, like, for example, one of our positioning plays is that we help people create interactive demos in 10 minutes.
Right.
That's not like the thing that we just keep sharing quite a bit. And that's the fact, like, that's how customers say it and everything, right? And then there's others that actually don't. And so we've seen sometimes where customers kind of use that, against you, where it's like, hey, you can't create interactive demos in 10 minutes. And then we use it, we use the price angle with somebody else, where it's like, hey, you kind of are not the right way. But I think the reason why I was kind of discussing this was because sometimes, and this may be a question to you, right? Like, sometimes when you kind of bash the other competitor, right, just focusing on dialing down on like on those aspects, right, it can come across a little biased to the buyer. Yeah. So how do you kind of perhaps approach it. You know, like we've always seen those competitor comparison pages, right? Where it's like you're the winner and the other one's the loser and everything,
Right.
right? And like buyers in 2024 are very aware, right? Like they call out that BS right away. So I mean, I don't know how do you kind of tackle that basically?
Yeah, so there's a really cool stat. I think it's actually been updated. I think it's so this is probably a little outdated, but it's 57% of, so basically before a buyer or a potential customer ever talks to a seller, they're about 57% of the way done with their research, right? So they're coming to your seller because they're just like, I want to see what you got, see if it validates what I think, and I want to go and buy it, right?
Mm-hmm.
With that, I think you are missing. That's where, like, back to Challenger, that reframe, right? It's like, well, are you thinking about this in the right way? Have you considered the right problem as as the seller is having a conversation and uncovering why they're trying to buy a new solution or replace a solution? Like, what are we really missing here to make sure that you're making the right purchase decision? I think another piece of the Challenger research that I think is really fascinating is something called FOMO. It's the fear of messing up, right? I think more than anything, buyers are so risk averse. That's why they're spending so much time researching so they don't make the wrong decision. But so many deals end up in a decision anyways because they're like, you know what I've got is good enough. But I think you got to dial up that pain and also be able to present the information in a competitive scenario without bashing a competitor, but really just highlighting, okay, if your solution, if you're saying that your pain point and what you're trying to solve is X, Y, and Z, well, here's how our solution does that. And you can admit in a sale, there was one seller that I was watching a Gong call the other day, did a great job about talking about how a method, the prospect was saying, oh, the method, it's very similar. They're like, yeah, but here's how we take it one step further. Here's how we make sure that your win rates are higher or better because of this, how our research. So you can admit, you're in the right. You can validate those thoughts without saying, they're wrong or they're awful, because that's not probably entirely true. But you can obviously point back to how your solution really solves those problems better than what's out there in the market.
For sure.
Yeah, I feel like the providing a true insight that is novel to a prospect, like that's the hard part, because like when I've shopped for software personally in the past, it's like I basically go to G2. I basically like look at the website of like every single company that's like in that category.
Mm-hmm.
And I start to get a sense of like, okay, what are like the common features amongst all of these companies? Like what parts of this problem are they solving for me?
Right.
Et cetera, et cetera. So like kind of have a sense of that before I like actually talk to a salesperson. I don't know. I don't really have a specific question. I don't really have a specific idea, but I'm just like, that must be so hard to actually find the reframe. I think it's like really helpful when you share examples of it. Did you have a reframe? I mean, we've obviously talked about like the multi-audience thing with your previous LMS. Like, was that the reframe, that it was like the salesperson would be like, well, oh, it sounds like you want to enable actually customers and your partners. Like, how do you plan to do that with these other offerings? Like, is that the reframe in that situation?
That's exactly it, right? So they're coming to you, they, fill out the form or they accept the BDR's, first touch, and they see a demo. But as you're going through the sales cycle and they're talking about growth goals, right? They're talking about acquiring more customers. That's when the seller will come in and ask those. And so that's where product marketing, provides the right material and helps them have the conversation of what are you really trying to do with education or, your methodology? How are you trying to really grow? And so it's really those powerful questions that come into play. And then when you're listening to those drivers, if they're talking about growth, if they're talking about retention, it's like, okay, well, how are you going to do that if you're only focused on this area of your business, right? So it is definitely, it's definitely something that you have to, have a skill to, and you have to acquire and work on. But that is the reframe, when you're coming in and you're saying, hey, this is what you're missing out on if you don't focus on, solving this problem. So,
and to some extent, the prospect kind of has to express that it's important,
right?
I would imagine.
Right.
I want to make sure that everyone in the audience knows they can ask us questions, because we're nearing time. We haven't got any questions yet. So there should be on the sort of right sidebar, there's a little question button, which you can click into the question zone. So feel free to drop anything in the chat or ask us questions over there. Okay, I want to talk now about like once you've decided on the position, you have established the differentiation, you know what your reframe is. You mentioned before, like before a new feature, you kind of like sent a bunch of emails in advance communicating internally. But I'm curious about the assets that you'd use both internally and externally once something is live. What is the most effective kind of way to get the message out there?
Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of battle cards. I think they are a great resource to equip your sales team with. So, but I think the key is instead of just, I think with any sort of asset, any sort of resource, if it's easy for sellers and for CS people to use, and it's in a place that they already live, that it's going to be adopted a lot faster and actually get used. So at my previous org, we used Crayon, and then one of the things I loved about that tool was you could create the resource. So I would create, gamification battle card, and we would have our major competitors on there and how we, positioned against them, where we shine, where our gaps were, just to be, just to make sure everyone's on with all the information they need. But I think the kicker for us was that it lived in Salesforce, and our sellers lived in Salesforce every day. So they could pull it up in an opportunity, right? And they're having a conversation like live on a call, and they can pull up the opportunity in Salesforce to see the battle card, and it's right there in their faces. That was for sales. For CS, which I think is a super important group that is sometimes under-enabled from the retention standpoint, we put it in a gain site where they lived every day, right? So, we created this like custom iframe. It was really cool to get it in the gain site so they could use the same materials. So that way they had the same information in different conversations. So that was a really powerful asset. Obviously, talking points and slide decks just to help sellers and CS folks prep for calls. We can get really asset happy, but I think more than anything, whatever is created and whatever, it's got to address the problem, it's got to solve the problem, but it's also got to live where your team is, so it's actually adopted and used.
That's the thing. It's like you could make the best things, but if it's not like managed in the right way, it's not going to get you anywhere.
Exactly.
I'm curious if you have like a checklist in your head where it's like every time you launch, you're like, okay, great. Like here are the 5 things on my checklist.
Right. Yeah.
The 5 things I'd like to hear.
My 5 things for any launch are: do we have a home base for this information? You never want to send things in emails or in team chats. They get lost. People don't pay attention. So do we have a home base for all these resources to point our folks in the field to? Do we have a base level slide deck? A couple quick slides that you can add to existing, if you have a project call with a client, you can add this new feature update in there. Or, if you're talking to a prospect and what's launching is relevant to their pain points and you can use it in your reframe, can you add it to that or introduce it? We love video. I think video is really powerful. So can we show a demo of this? Can we like have something? I think what Storylane is doing is really cool. Can we like show them better than we can tell them? So any sort of video asset, if we can get it before launch, customer quotes and how they're using it, something you can drop into an email or in a conversation. And my 5th is a feedback loop. So, based on what you got, did it help your problems? Did it solve your problems? What was missing? So that way we can constantly iterate and make it better for the team. So those are my 5.
That's for customers or that's for the teams you're enabling?
The teams that I'm enabling.
Yeah, exactly. To solve that, do you do like a Slack channel for every launch or like what's your method usually?
Yeah, so we have team chats for both like the sellers and our CSMs. And so I'm typically in there. We also have internal newsletters. I don't lead one at Challenger currently, but we've got great ones for our teams. And so I'll make sure that I send a product marketing section is in all of those. So I send that to the folks that send that out. And then we also have a go-to-market town monthly. So, we're bringing the team together. We're talking about these things in one place. I think that's really powerful because we're sharing it with CS and sales at the same time. So everyone's hearing the same message, once. So those are our 3 communication channels.
All right. I have another question here. So, I think I think this is more like if if an organization is very heavily sales led, right? Sending decks and everything. Let's talk about perhaps a PLG organization, right? Like somebody, folks can sign up on their own, try the product, make their own assumptions as quickly as possible, right? How would you perhaps communicate this then to them?
Directly to customers?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think tools like any sort of product walkthrough you can do where you can provide like guidance. I think people want to be taught, and people want to be led to the right solution. I think it goes back to that fear of messing up, right? Like, is this really going to solve my problems? Can I trust this information? So that's where so any sort of product walkthrough I can give with the right messaging, the right tips to show, depending on who's looking through the interactive demo, that's where I would go. I think blog content is super helpful and relevant in that as well. So if you can point them to, like, in an email cadence, right? If you have somebody that try to walk through an interactive demo and then you drop their email into a cadence and you can educate them throughout the process, that's really powerful. So you've got like blog content, any sort of video you can do, I think is really powerful as well. So, around the problems that you're solving. So those are kind of the areas that I like to play in for direct to customer communication.
I love that because, like interestingly, so I had another conversation with Rory Sadler, who's the CEO at Trumpet, and he introduced me to a concept called sense-making sales. I don't know if you've guys, heard about it, but basically what that means is that, so when we think about buyers, right, they're kind of going around, making assumptions and making their own version of positioning by
Mm,
their, right? So like what Chantal mentioned, they would go on a G2, look at kind of products, see what are like the table stakes features that that category software have, and then try to kind of make their own assumptions, right?
mhm,
And when that happens, you don't have full control over it, right? Because they're doing that at a third party platform where it's influenced by, maybe more budget from the company or more reviews and all of that, right? But if you
mhm,
do that, on your own website, but try to kind of give that in an unbiased way. So what you mentioned, Caitlin, like through perhaps a blog or through an interact demo or through any of those others, and just be super transparent to just get that buyer confidence, but have control of your narrative, your positioning, your differentiation in that, right? That way you have control over it, right? Kind of bringing in that. So sense making was a very interesting approach that they mentioned. It kind of ties in fairly well to what you just mentioned right now.
mhm. Yeah, I wrote that down because I've never heard of it, but I definitely want to do some more research into that. That sounds really applicable because you're right. I think one of the harder things to do is um, repositioning somebody on your solution or your service when they already have an assumption, right? And
Mhm.
that's really hard to do. Or it's like, okay, you think you know what we do, but now we've got to walk you back and educate you on it, and then we can go from there. So that's that 57% of buyers already do their research. Like that is what we're coming up against. I think, like I said, it's more now, but that's why that educational content is so critical, right? To helping folks really see where you sit in the market, educate them on what they're not maybe thinking about, so that way you're having those informed conversations and leading them back to your solution that's really going to help solve their problems, which is what we're all in the business to do. So
Oh, absolutely. And I'll throw in another statistic which I again heard recently.
Mhm.
70% of the buyers end up choosing the first platform they try.
Wow.
No.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, I just hate to hear that. That's so discouraging because it kind of means like the company with the most advertising spend or something is like maybe going to be the one that wins because they're just like the first to the race.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, of course, all of these data is like, I mean, people tend to kind of, tweak it in their own way. But like, I mean, I think it kind of goes in, I mean, that's what it explains, right? Like, usually buyers don't have the time today, right? And they'll just kind of go in if there's a product that kind of adds into their field. Like, for example, look at you, Shant, like you would have gone to G2, looked at those 10 products. And if you invested the time to sign up for a trial for the product, there's a 70% chance that you'd actually end up buying it.
I'm thinking back to my Storylane sales process because this was one where I did look at a lot of different options. Don't ask me what they were because I don't remember anymore. But I don't think Storylane was the first one, and one of the big reasons why I like trusted Storylane more and wanted to work with you guys more was that like all the functionality was there. It was super easy to use and like just like wonderful. And also there was a free trial at that time. Um, and so I think there are also things that are differentiators that actually have nothing to do with the product.
Mm-hmm.
Even if like all the competitors are the same, like they have all the same functionality or whatever, there could be like a different way to pay. Maybe you could pay by credit card, maybe it's monthly billing, like maybe there's a free trial, or there can be like different focuses on specific audiences or something like that. Um, I don't know. And that can sometimes be the aha moment also,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting.
It is because, like the interesting point is so I was evaluating an email marketing tool recently for Storylane, right? And I was evaluating a bunch of providers. And there was this one provider which I'd zeroed in on based on the reviews, based on my version of positioning. And then I saw first I had to sign up for a free trial. Once you sign up for a free trial, you got to kind of go through all of those loopholes. And it took me 2 weeks to finally actually try the product. I just kind of gave up. And what we've heard from customers is that if you can kind of give that preview through an interactive demo earlier, right, you're kind of kind of heading ahead of the pack versus everybody else, right? Most of the folks are like videos and screenshots and everything, but once you give an interact demo, you've kind of given them a glimpse of the product experience, right? So it gives you that edge, perhaps. I don't know if that kind of supports your point, Chantal, but just thought I'd share that.
I think, yeah, that could be another way to differentiate, which is like your sales process is better and maybe start sooner. And like, or also like, yeah, if buyers are able to shop in a way that they actually want, like that's a differentiator as well. Yeah, I'm sure the list goes on, but it's like there are tons of non-product related things that can be a big difference, can make a big difference in a buying decision. Yeah.
And then it's also like you can de-risk a lot. So by the time they get to that seller or they're in the conversation with the kid, I've seen this, I trust it, or I have questions about it, which is a great way for like sellers to come in and educate. And that's another, I think, differentiator too. It's like you're not just trying to get me to purchase something, you want me to make an informed decision. And that speaks to the partnership, I think, that you get on the CS side of the house, right? When you become a customer, you kind of get a preview of what that's like. You're like, okay, this is a trusted partner that wants me to grow with them and wants to solve my problems. I think it kind of all goes back to that de-risking of the sales process. So it's like the time you're spending, you're actually going to learn something. And maybe if you don't go to the solution, that's fine, but you can take what you learned to the next one, So that's kind of, I think, that was a great call out.
Speaking of CS, there is a question about CS, which I want to get to real quick with our last few minutes. The question is, what is CS's role in product positioning? How do they further drive product positioning? I think another way to frame it is like, how have you worked with CS teams in the past to inform the positioning?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. Like I said, I think that CS is one of like the most like under-enabled groups. They're so powerful because they're with customers every day. So I think that's where I lean on y'all. So what I'd like to do is present the facts or the information of the product positioning, where we're trying to go with it, and then I trust CS to either help me validate it or unvalidate it. Right? We work together to fix that. When it comes to your client conversations, when you're sharing a new release, knowing where to talk about it with which clients that you're speaking with and how they can use it. I think the education piece is so important because you know how the client uses the product or the service in their organization. So that's where I see them really playing nicely with product positioning is being able to educate and kind of like surprise and delight customers with like, here's a new thing that we can do. Based on our last call, you were struggling with X, is how it'll solve it for you. So it's really like prolonging that journey with customers and educating them throughout the process.
Has CS in organizations that you've been at been responsible for running beta programs, or like are they involved in the beta program? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they don't run the beta programs, but they are a key partner in helping us get beta clients. Oh, you're welcome, Vanessa. That was a great question. They are not necessarily, they don't run the program, but they are like heavy influencers and stakeholders in the process. So they're helping us think about the right kind of materials, the right time frame, like customer commitment that we can count on. So they're a huge player, but they don't run it, right? They kind of like hand off their customers to product and product marketing, but they're running alongside with them, making sure, like we make sure on the product marketing side that they're enabled to talk about the beta program with their customers. But it's definitely something that's, in my experience, has been product led, but product marketing and CS supported completely.
I've been at, most of the companies I've been at have had like smaller product functions just because they've been smaller companies.
Right.
And so CS is like one of the key people that you talk to understand like truly how customers are using the tool.
Right.
And like sales helps you understand kind of what's the market asking for. And then CS is kind of like for those nuggets of insight of like, oh, actually, like this is the most important thing to our best customers. Have you seen that play out?
So I've worked at organizations where the product teams are actually bigger. That's funny
Yeah.
that you said that. So they're the ones that are kind of bringing what they've seen, their research, and then we're partnering with CS and sales to validate it. And depending on the product launch or the feature, some of it's focused towards like new customer acquisition. So like we want to talk to sales a little bit more, or we want to talk to new customers customers that are less than a year with their engagement with us. If it's something that's focused on retention and growth, we want to like dive deep with customers, especially going back to our earlier point, like our ICP customer, right? So like it's enterprise customers. We want to talk to them. We want to get in their heads to validate that. So it's funny. My experience has been the kind of the opposite, but definitely, regardless, you're talking cross functionally, you're not doing anything in a silo.
For sure. Not of any final points before we wrap up here.
I don't have points, but I do have questions because Caitlin's been such an amazing.
I know we could keep going forever.
I feel like it could be a good 6-hour session,
Yeah.
But I think one. So here's an interesting thing, right? Like, so I think a lot of times, you might be operating in a category where uh, the table stakes features are the same, and essentially the products are literally the same, like 99% the same features. What the buyers would, from a buyer's point of view, there's no differentiating between product A and product B. Let's just put it that way, right? Has there ever been a time where perhaps that kind of led to a discussion coming from marketing back to the leadership on like, hey, we actually need to, I don't know, have some sort of differentiation or kind of, like, I don't know, like, but has that ever happened, or is there a different way to perhaps tackle it? Because sometimes you just, yeah.
Yeah, and it does. I think like when you're playing in the same space, like goes back to the me, like those table stakes features, right? Like you gotta have them. I think something that's been powerful in my experience is having that common enemy. So what is the enemy? Is it wasted time? Is it wasted effort? Is it, starting in the wrong direction? Depending on like what the company is literally built to do, like what's your company story? You can lean in heavily on that to inform your differentiation. But definitely something that I've done is just go back to leadership, share some ideas that I've had, and like, hey, this is our common enemy. I know this feature is table stakes. Everyone does it. This is how I want to approach it, and get a green light or red light, yellow light, and then take that back to CS and sales and start to kind of feel that out with customers. So that's how I've approached it. Really, I mean, totally no framework, really organic, but it's worked and it's been really positive. So I think it goes back to like rallying around that common enemy of why your company exists in the first place.
That's a great tip. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and also everyone, I think one thing that I can definitely take away from this is mainly that irrespective of, even if you have the same features, same product, everything, right? There's absolutely no way that you're gonna have the same background story. That's for sure.
Right.
Right. And at all, like you just can't help with anything else. You still have that one differentiation.
Right.
Anyway. Yeah.
That's it. You wrapped it up.
I have an example of this exact thing, I think, which is like the previous company that I worked at served an unskilled buyer who like wasn't an expert in the thing. And a lot of the softwares that existed were for people who really knew what they were doing. And if you didn't, then you got an agency. But like our tool was actually built to support people who were not necessarily experts in the thing. And so it's like that is the company story, which informs a different way of approaching the product. And yeah, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's lots of those. Even if you look at Basecamp versus Asana, perhaps, right? Same feature, but Basecamp comes from that 40-hour work week and like very opinionated about certain ways of work-life balance, right? Versus Asana, like same features, just a different background story,
Yeah, that's a good example.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, Caitlin, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. So fun to have you on, and so many great ideas that you shared with us today. And thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thanks. This was so much fun. Y'all have a good one.
Bye. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.